Hello and welcome to Hexed Encountered. My name is Joe. Today I am going to be doing a playthrough, perhaps not the whole game, but at least a few turns, hopefully, of the game Our God Was My Shield, Jackson's Valley Campaign. This is by John Theissen, map art by Ilya Kudryashov, and this is from the American Civil War Operational Series. This is the first volume. I believe the second volume has been released now. This game's been out for a little bit. I bought it in Hollandspiele's Holland Days sale last year, the holidays, along with a few other games. I really like Hollandspiele games, just throwing that out there. If you have not tried any of their games, all their games that I've played are pretty damn good, so I would recommend trying them out. And this game is probably no exception. I only say probably because I haven't actually played, a lot of it. I played a little bit just to kind of familiarize myself with the rules. It's a pretty straightforward game, not overly complex. I think it's got a 2 on Board Game Geek in terms of the complexity rating. So it is a relatively simple and straightforward game. I shouldn't say simple. It's a relatively straightforward game with some unique mechanics that I will talk about as we play. Instead of doing like the full first look and blah, 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 I'm just going to jump in and do some play through and we'll see how it goes. Maybe there'll be a part 2, depending on how things are going, how long it takes me to go through, as much of the game to give you guys a flavor of what it's all about as possible. And then, we'll see, like I said, we'll see where we go with this. So I'm going to clean this up here and get us all set up for the start. And then I'll talk about, the situation and everything and, get into particulars of how the game works. Okay, so here you can see the entire map, basically. You can't see like half a hex at the top is missing. But this is essentially the entirety of the map. There are some charts over here. This is our game turn track, which is sideways for you guys. But scenario A starts on May 8th. Scenario B would start on the 16th. And then there's a scenario C, which will actually run into July. The other 2 scenarios run through June 9. So you have May 8th through June 9 or May 16th through June 9 with different setups. So basically, this is the entirety of Jackson's Valley Campaign. This is operational level, so you're up a little bit. It's not tactical. There are some interesting mechanics, as I mentioned, as far as being able to try to evade combat or avoid combat is one of the mechanics. There's a coordination role as well for the attacker if you wanted to combine forces. So there's a lot of kind of, I guess, chancy, maybe, I guess I would call it, for lack of a better word. But there is some things that I guess you could say luck maybe plays a role. Die rolls play a role is what it is. So our 2 overall commanders would be Banks for the Union. He's here. And of course, the title character here, Thomas Jackson down here, better known as Stonewall. He's right here. And so this is the valley, obviously. You have Port Republic. Banks is in Harrisonburg. Up in the corner up there, you can kind of half see it, is Hagerstown and Williamsport. Saxon up here, or Saxton rather, he's in Harper's Ferry. Here is Winchester. That is one of the supply points, a Union supply depot here, which is one of the things that the Confederates can capture for victory points. And that reminds me, I haven't put out the victory point locations yet, so I'll need to do that. So I'll have to take a pause again. Fremont is down here. Fremont can't double time, where you can actually double your movement rate. So he's kind of a slow plotter kind of guy. And he's got 2 units under him, Blenker and Bayard, who are both disrupted currently, which gives them a die roll, a die roll modifier, which hurts their performance, of course, as you would expect. So you have the Confederate forces. You have Jackson here with Johnson with him. You have Ashby with the cavalry. You have Ewell. He has some cavalry as well. And you have Branch over here in Gordonsville. Then on the Union side, we have the aforementioned Fremont with Blenker and Bayard here. You have Geary over here, Saxton here, and Banks is sitting here in Harrisonburg. Now, Harrisonburg has orders from the White House, according to the scenario setup, where Lincoln is basically telling him, you can't attack and you can't move south of Harrisonburg. So eventually the Confederate forces are going to move this way, and that will push Banks to move as well. And if he gets to Strasburg, then the restrictions come off and he's got free reign to move about as he will. So that's the basics of the setup. I'll talk about the specifics of certain things. Like these two guys, Geary and Branch, are kind of locked in their position. They have a little red hex on their counters. The cavalry guys will have a horse on their, or cavalry units rather, will have a horse on their counter, as you can see right here. This is Ewell's cavalry. It's got a little horsey guy right there. And now I forgot where I had him. Ewell goes in 2411. So that would be right here. So I've been trying to kind of, stack them so you can see the unit that's under them. Because you have leaders like Banks here. And then you have Ewell, obviously, Jackson, etc. They actually have off-map displays that track their strength points. So like Banks, for example, has 4 strength points. And then as you go into combat, etc., you get whittled down, of course. Jackson starts with 5 strength points. You can have detachments where you remove some of your force so you can split your force, etc. So there's a lot of, nuance in this as far as trying to attack. And you can play it, I believe, with basically hidden values in some cases where you don't really know the strength of the opponent. And so you don't know if you want to pull out and try to avoid combat, which you can try to do, or if you want to commit to combat. And then, of course, you have combats determined by odds, basically. And, there are, you can have disruptions, you can have casualties, of course, you can have forced retreats, etc., etc. So all the basic stuff that you would expect in a game. So this is, as I mentioned, obviously it's an American Civil War game. This is actually the first American Civil War game that I've done for my channel, because I haven't played a lot of Civil War games, at least not at this level or the tactical level. I've always played, or I have played strategic level games, but not anything at this level. So I'm gonna finish setting up the map, and then I'll come back and we'll get into some gameplay. Okay, so our victory point locations are marked with something like this, one of these counters here. So that's Port Royal. We have one up here in Martinsburg, Harper's Ferry, Winchester, and Port Republic. And so basically the Confederates capture one of these, they get to remove this and place their own on there, and that would indicate that they get victory points for capturing that. So the way the turn signal works, or the turn sequence rather. Did I say turn signal? I'm not driving a car, we're playing a game. So the way the turn sequence works in this game is you have a caution and uncertainty roll at the start of the turn. Well, first you do the weather. So I'm going to roll for weather. There is a rain mud table. So on a roll of 1 or 2 from May 8th through the 31st, it's rain and mud. After that, it goes up from it's 1 to 3 from June 1st to the 10th. And we're going to actually only play up until June 9th, assuming I even get that far in the video. But it is possible to have an extended campaign if you wish to play all the way up until July 2nd. So this is basically a sandbox game. So you don't have to, obviously there were a series of battles fought during this Shenandoah Valley Campaign. And, you're not going to have the same battles, basically. So first let me roll for the weather. we rolled a 1. So it's rain this turn, rather. So we have to use the mud column of the terrain effects chart. And this is the terrain effects chart right here. So the mud column is right here. So obviously it makes movement in most cases a little bit more expensive. Right? Nobody likes to be out in the rain. They didn't like it in 1862 and they don't like it now. So after that, we do our coordination and uncertainty roll. So it says, during this phase of your turn, make a caution and uncertainty roll. If the result is 1, the affected units cannot attack this turn. The U.S. player rolls separately for Fremont, Shields, and Ord. Shields and Ord are not yet on the map, but Fremont is. And then all the other units would go with Banks and his roll. So again, if you roll a 1, so we'll roll for Fremont first. And we get a 3, so he's okay. Now we'll roll for Banks. We get a 6, so he's okay. The Confederacy, they just roll 1 die because Jackson is in charge. It counts for everybody. So it's a 5, which means that nobody's unable to attack. And actually there's a rule that anybody who's within 2 hexes of Jackson can attack regardless. The other thing, I didn't really mention this, but let's take a look at Stonewall's counter here. So here is Stonewall Jackson's counter. You can see it has a 4 on it. That's how many movement points he has. And if you look at everybody else, their movement points are at 2. So that's because, Stonewall Jackson was well known for stealing a march on people, doing 40 miles in a couple days and so on and so forth. And nobody else was doing that kind of stuff. So that's why his movement is a 4 and everybody else is a 2. Actually, Fremont is a 4 as well, now that I'm looking at him. But most everybody else, including the cavalry guys, is a 2. So after that, we do reinforcements, which will not take place, obviously, on the first turn of the game. Then we come to movement. And the Confederates always go first. So it is May 8th. If you know your Civil War history, Jackson attacked Milroy down here at the very bottom of the map in McDowell. So he's obviously close enough. So you only have to move adjacent to a unit to attack it. So just for the sake of argument, we're going to try to mimic what happened historically. We're going to move Jackson's force, which consists of Jackson and Johnson, and we're going to move them here. And so you do all your movement, then you do your combat. Now I didn't talk about this, but this is clear terrain down here as well. So it costs 1 normally to move in that terrain. In the rain and mud, it costs 2. So Jackson does have, obviously he's got 4. So that's half of the movement allowance for him. The guys with him, Johnson, if I can do this, has a 2, of course. So here we have Milroy, and they're obviously going to be on the defensive here, but we have to finish our Confederate move first. So we have Ashby here with the cavalry force. Now, cavalry by default has no strength points. I did mention Branch and Geary. They are limited in how far they can move. I think one of them, Branch is limited to 5 hexes around Gordonsville, and Geary is limited to 3 hexes around 1201, which is here. You can set them up within 3 hexes of 1201. I actually put them in 1401 on the rail line because if he ever gets released, and I'm not even sure if he does ever get released, but anyway, I wanted him somewhere a little bit closer. You can do things like destroy rail lines, destroy bridges, and so on. You can build earthworks, and so on and so forth. You can fortify your position. So these are things that you can do. Ashby has Jackson's cavalry, and then Ewell has cavalry as well. Now, what we can do with cavalry is we can attempt to take this position here. Now, neither one of these guys can get to it yet because they will have to cross he would have to cross the river. So he could go here, which would actually cost him 2 right now. So if we do this, let's just say we move him here, that costs him 2. Moving him here likewise would cost him 2 as well. So that's the extent of their moves. I'm going to leave Branch where he is, and that's it. That's all the Confederate forces we have. Now we would move to the combat phase. So as you can see, the game moves pretty quickly. The turns will go quickly because there's not a million counters here. We have relatively limited forces, but these are reasonably sizable forces if this were at a lower level scale. Okay, so before I get into the combat, I just did want to mention both sides have cards, 7 cards. They get them all at the start with the various events basically that they can play at any time. So both sides have them. That was obviously the Confederate deck. This is the Union deck. So this is, of course, a 2-player game. You can play it solitaire. It plays pretty well solitaire, but obviously it's probably better. In fact, I would say it's definitely better to play 2-handed. You get a little bit more fog of war. You get the card play, because you can play a card that would cancel the effect of the other card, so on and so forth. So you miss out on that somewhat playing solitaire. And I'm not even sure if I will use the cards. I might just play without them. But we'll see. So obviously after, I shouldn't say obviously, but after movement comes combat. So combat is fairly straightforward, okay? So you have to declare your attack. So, the Confederates are going to say, we're attacking Milroy here at McDowell, just as they did on May 8th, 1862. During the war itself, okay? Now, Milroy would have the opportunity here to say, whoa, I'm going to bug out, or at least try to bug out, and get out of Dodge here. So the combat procedure, which is also on a handy-dandy card, as well as being printed in the rule book, of course. You can see here, declare attack, retreat before combat, also known as RBC, succeeds on a 3 or higher. So if Milroy, for example, says, you know what, Jackson's got probably more troops than I do. My strength, he's got 4 strength points, and I realize I totally forgot to show you the cards, but I'll show you the cards here in a bit. The SP display cards, that is. So Milroy's got a strength of 4. Jackson actually has a strength of 5, and he has Johnson with him, who has a strength of 2. So that's 7 to 4. Just to show you how that would work, if we say, well, you know what, I want to get out of here, I'm just going to roll, and if I got a 4, like I just did, then I can say, well, I'm going to retreat before combat. Right? But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Milroy says, I don't want to retreat, I want to fight it out. So now what you do is you have to do, if we had, say, Jackson was here and Johnson was in an adjacent hex. They're not in the same hex, which isn't really possible here because this is a mountain and they can't be on that hex. So if Jackson and Johnson were together, like adjacent to each other, they could attempt to coordinate. Oh, I said that backwards. Concentrate forces is the defender. So that would be if, Fremont was sitting here, you'd roll to see if Fremont can come to Milroy's aid, shift the balance. And basically on the combat results table, which you can kind of see a little bit here, you get a column, you get the column, like here's the 1-to-1 column, but you always round in favor of the defender. So if it was, now Jackson had the advantage, obviously 7-4. So that's still 1-to-1. Actually, that would be 3-2, now that I think about it. That would be 3-2 because it would be 6-4 would make it 3-2. So it would actually be 3-2. So we're going to see what happens when we roll for the attack here. So we're going to assume, because you have your coordination, which is the attacker trying to bring forces together, and you have your concentrate forces, which is the defender trying to do the same thing when you have forces in adjacent hexes. So that can, essentially they ride in and join forces before battle is joined and kind of shift the balance of power a little bit, right? So that's the theory there, I'm assuming. So we calculate our ratio. Then we look at our terrain effects chart. Now they're in clear terrain. So combat, no effect. Now some of them, if you're in the woods, you roll on the woods table. There is a woods table on here. Actually, it's on the other side, I think. Yeah, it's right here. So this is the woods table. Here's your attack coordination table. This is the other side of the player aid card. So you can see 1 to 3 coordination problems. You shift the CRT one column to the left. 6, you get a shift to the right, which is better for the attacker. So if you can roll a 6, thumbs up. If you roll a 1 to 3, thumbs down. Same thing with the defender attempting to concentrate forces. 1 is 2, 1, 2 is allowed. 3 arrives late. 4 cannot make the move. You have some die roll modifiers if the attack's across a river or you're retreating across a river. That's a penalty. All the attackers are in the woods also is a penalty, etc., etc. So you would roll on here, and then if you did have some defensive works, you have Abatis 1, Abatis 2, and then earthworks, obviously increasingly complex works that make it harder on the attacker. And then you have disruption recovery. So if you have a disrupted marker, you add a +2 DRM. And so for Fremont's command, basically this makes it like impossible to recover, because Fremont he was a kind of a political appointee, etc., etc., not really all that much of a general, shall we say. You also have to roll for bridge destruction if you want to attempt to destroy a bridge. All right, so that is that. So now we know that we're on the 3 to 2 column here. And on the 3 to 2 column, we roll 1 die and you have a 1 to 6. We don't have any modifiers. It's straight up combat. This is really simple. We roll the die. We get a 1. So a 1 is a D, capital D, little d, and a question mark. You have this ADDD subtable. So you roll again, and a 1 to 4 means disrupt and retreat. A 5 or 6, retreat 1 hex, which would be optional if you're the attacker or mandatory if you're the defender. So he rolls a 5, so he doesn't have to disrupt, so that's good. He does still have to retreat. So he has to retreat 1 hex, so he goes here, and that's the end of the battle. Now, the winner of the battle didn't take any losses there, but there's a casualty table as well. So you roll the casualty table. Now, Jackson could advance and take McDowell because the defender retreated. Whether or not he wants to do that is up to the Confederate player, because it might not be to his advantage to take the town. He didn't really want to take the town per se. This town doesn't really matter in the strategic scheme of things, at least not in gameplay terms. But it would put him adjacent to Milroy if he wanted to hit him again, assuming Milroy doesn't, skedaddle once we get into the Union turn, which is coming up next. So that's how that would work. But the first thing we have to address is our casualty table. So down here in the bottom right corner, you have your casualty table. The way this works is you look at the 2 forces, and we know Jackson's got 7 SPs and Milroy has 4. So you use the lower of the 2 forces, which would be Milroy, which is a 4. You roll the die and you cross-reference, okay? So with a 4, so it rounds down to a 3. So the only way anybody loses anything is if they roll a 1. And what that means is if we roll this die, and I rolled a 1, but let's just say for argument's sake I rolled a 6. Now if I rolled a 6, 6 is a 1 here, both sides would lose 1 strength point. And now is a good time to show you the SP display. Okay, so there you see the SP display for both sides. So obviously you can see the leaders, right? Here's Banks, Milroy, Blenker, Saxton, Shields, Ord. Over here, you have Jackson, and Jackson's a little complicated because he can detach. The Union guys can't detach forces, but the Confederates can. So you can so basically Jackson can split his forces. Then you have Johnson over here, and Johnson can be subsumed essentially into Ewell, and Ewell can actually split his off as well. Then you have Branch, Whiting, and Lawton rather. Now down here it tells you who they can command. So Jackson can command anybody. Ewell can command his own stuff, his Ewell detachment, Ewell cavalry, and Colonel Ashby can command any Confederate cavalry, whether his own or Jackson's. On the Union side, you have Banks, who can command himself, obviously his cavalry and Geary. Fremont can command Milroy, Blenker, and Bayard, and Sigel can command Saxton. So that's now up here is the tracks of their strength. So as I mentioned, Jackson starts with 5. He's got 5. This is his strength point marker. If he had taken a casualty in that battle, you just slide it to 4. Same thing with Milroy over here. If Milroy had taken a casualty, you slide him to 3. So that's how that works. So this is off board, and it tracks your strength points. And I know this isn't anything like groundbreaking, because there are other games that have this kind of system in them, but it keeps the clutter off the board, so to speak, and it's a good way for both sides to know the strength. And if you're playing opposed, if you're playing two-player, your opponent doesn't necessarily get to see your SP display, so you have some hidden information there about just how strong your units are until they collide in battle, and then you have to do the odds calculation, and you're going to know, basically what the strength is of both sides. So that's how that works. Okay, so after you do that, after combat, the next phase is recovery. So we don't have anybody disrupted on the Confederate side. So basically you recover disrupted units, or you attempt to recover disrupted units. And this is the one and only point in the game where supply really matters, because you have to be in supply, or you take a DRM to make it harder to recover. And as we saw with Fremont and Shields, who's not on the map yet, when they're disrupted, it's extremely difficult for them to recover. Basically what's going to happen here is, to get a negative DRM, they need to be the Fremont, or any unit. To get a -1, you have to be stacked with or adjacent to an on-map supply source. So Fremont supply is up here. We also have a supply source here, and as well. And Harper's Ferry, Harper's Ferry is a garrison. So you have the Fremont spot here and the Winchester spot. Harper's Ferry, or maybe it's Hagerstown, one of those two, I don't remember off the top of my head, can also be a supply location. So with that in mind, I think what we're going to do here is we're going to skedaddle Milroy out of here. So again, we're still in a rain mud thing, so turn. So Milroy can only move 1 hex. So he's going to move up, which in theory could put him, if we get rain again, could put him out of range of Jackson, but it might not. There's also forced rest turns, so you do have this friendly rest turn counter here that you have to do once every quarter month. So you can see here we have this row of dates, then the next row, then the next. Each one of these rows is a quarter month. They're 8 days apiece. So sometime between the 8th and the 15th, both sides will have to rest. Milroy moved. I also want to move this stack, so we're going to move these guys. And I kind of put them all together because these guys are both disrupted, so I'm going to stack them now that I've shown that they're disrupted. Fremont, however, is not, but still they're only going to move 1 because I want to keep the stack together. So hopefully we get better weather, and then they can move 2, and so on. So some of the stuff in the game is not going to be fast developing, and I've been describing everything, so the turns will move much more quickly. You know what I didn't do? I didn't do the full turn correctly. The caution and uncertainty roll, I rolled for both sides at the same time, and I should have just rolled for the Confederates and then moved on. But essentially it's a wash anyway, because, obviously I could have rolled a 1, but I didn't for either of the forces for the Union. So we skipped the reinforcements because there aren't any, and we just went to movement. Now we do have combat. I'm going to leave blank. Actually, do I want to have banks build? Let's talk about building fortifications, because we can. And, it may not be a big deal, but you can build defensive works, right? So defenders that occupy defensive works will receive certain benefits, most notably a role on the defensive works table, which I kind of showed you. It's right here on the player's aid, which gives you an opportunity to avoid a retreat, etc. Only if in the woods, right? So that's Abatis 1. But you can't get to Abatis 2 or Earthworks without starting in Abatis 1. So if we want, banks to be kind of defensive initially, which I might not do if I were the Union general in a two-player game, I might want to kind of try and... now, he can't move this way, but he can move this way, and he can attack. But, maybe I want to move up in this direction. Or maybe I want to go here and try and knock this bridge out and make it a little bit more difficult on the Confederates, because ultimately Jackson and his men are going to come this way. They're going to move north, up the valley, to try and wreak some havoc and, maybe catch some Union forces, defeat them in detail, maybe capture their victory locations, knock out their depot. They can actually draw supplies from this Union depot. They could also destroy it. If they get into Winchester and sit there for the one turn, on the next turn they can actually destroy the depot, which removes it from play, which will make it more difficult for Banks to supply his army. So these are all strategic decisions that you have to make as part of the game. Same thing's true for Fremont's supply point up here. If the Confederates could capture that and, prevent Fremont from having a place where he can draw supply from. Basically, the Union, because they go second, obviously, and Jackson is, an aggressive and creative general, shall we say, they're going to have to be they're on their heels a little bit and have to react to what Jackson's doing. Jackson has fewer men than the Union does, but the Union army and the Union commanders aren't as flexible as Jackson is. So that's the thing, the challenge for the Union is to kind of maybe get Jackson in a place where they can bring their numbers to bear and, beat on him a little bit. Otherwise, he can, piecemeal them to death, which is kind of what he did in the real campaign. So, getting back to what I was going to talk about, which is building defensive works. And I'm thinking right now this may just end up being more of a play example. I know at the beginning I was talking about play through, but this is turning into more of a play example where I'm explaining how everything works, which might be better in the long term than watching me play. Now there are other examples of play. I think at least I know that both Wayne Hansen has done a couple videos on this game, and Amabel also did a pretty good kind of recap of how John Theissen's system works, specifically this game, but also the other games he did before this one for Hollandspiele, which are similar in some ways. So both of those videos, or all three of those videos, I should say, are excellent, and check them out because they're on Board Game Geek if you can't find them on YouTube. But they're definitely worth checking out if you want a little bit more detail, especially from Amabel, because she's going to know this system better than I would, obviously. So, that's just something to take into account. But getting back to this, to build a defensive works, basically all you have to do is infantry with 2 or more string points, which Banks does have, may construct and upgrade defensive works. In a friendly movement phase, which is where we are now, place a working counter. So we have a working counter here, which has a little shovel on it. So we drop that on Mr. Banks, or General Banks. And then, as long as they're not attacked, because if they were attacked, which isn't going to happen because the Confederates have already moved, and none of those guys could get to Banks anyway in that turn. Once we get to the next Union reinforcement phase, which is it's not the very first thing, but it's early. It's before movement. So this would come off, and they would get an Abatis 1 marker, which is this guy. And then on the other side of it is the Abatis 2 marker. And then, of course, if you can do it 3 turns, they don't necessarily need to be consecutive, but 3 turns it would take to get to the Earthworks one, which is blank on the back, but you get the Earthworks as well. And Earthworks give you a pretty significant defensive benefit. So that's how that kind of works. So that would be the end of the movement phase for the Union, because I'm not going to move Geary. Saxton is kind of locked in up there until he gets activated because he's sitting on a garrison, essentially, there in Harper's Ferry. So that's really all there is to do. So again, it moves quickly. Like if I wasn't explaining all this and digressing and doing all this other stuff, we'd already be 3-4 turns into the game by now. So we would move to the second day, which would be May 9th, and we'd start all over again. Roll for weather, then do the Confederate turn, roll for their caution and uncertainty roll. And, assuming it's not mud, like if we roll, we got a 5, no mud. Okay, so we got clear, rained yesterday, now it's clear, which means that everybody gets their full movement and there's no negative impacts at all on anybody. So that's kind of how the game progresses, and I'm going to wrap it up now. It's been kind of long. I kind of thought I would go a little faster, but I always get wrapped up in trying to explain, how to play, and hopefully I didn't make any major mistakes. I may have screwed some stuff up because I tend to do that occasionally, but hopefully you guys got the gist of how this works. And I'm going to pick up the second game, so, maybe it'd be interesting to see the new game as opposed to this game, which, as I mentioned, already has a few other videos out there for you guys to watch to see if this game is interesting enough to you for you to pick it up. I would recommend it. I think it's a good game. Most people who've played it, that I've read the comments and so on Board Game Geek, think it's a good game. It's got a pretty good rating. And, like I said, I'm going to pick up the second one and play it as well. I'm trying, as I mentioned earlier, to get, a little bit more scope in my gameplay here. I tend to be heavily World War II. And then, I love World War III stuff, like hypothetical stuff. So I do that as well. World War I is also an interest, but that's all 20th century. Right, so it would be nice to go back to the 19th, the 18th, etc. I do have, the Great Battles of History. I have several of those. I have SPQR. I have Caesar Deluxe. I have Cataphract. So I have that stuff that I've been meaning to get to the table and on video, and I haven't gotten to that either. So again, I'm digressing again. I'm sorry. I do this a lot, but just to kind of give you guys as a little bonus sneak peek, so to speak, of where I'm at and what I'm thinking of doing right now to reward you for sitting through all of the preliminary stuff to get to this point. So hopefully you got something out of this. That is my intent and purpose in doing this stuff. I could just play these games and enjoy them myself, but, figure why not do something a little bit more interesting. And obviously, I've enjoyed the work of other content creators, so I'm sort of doing my bit, I guess, so to speak. So that will do it for this one. Please feel free to let me know what you think, comment-wise, if you think it would be interesting for me to do another few turns, maybe, with a lot less blather and a lot more action. I would certainly be willing to do that. I do have some new things coming in pretty soon. I do have some older things that I've been sitting on my shelf of shame that I'm hoping to get to soon. I do have a series that I will talk about very soon that I'm going to be doing. That'll be kind of a long-term thing that I'll do over probably a month or two with other stuff sprinkled in the middle just to kind of keep things fresh and provide things for people who might not be interested in what this particular series is going to be about. So, like I said, that's going to be something I will reveal probably pretty soon, sometime in the next 4 or 5 days at the longest, I would think. So anyway, that will do it. Thank you for watching. Please consider liking, sharing, and or subscribing. If you are a subscriber, I definitely appreciate it. The support means a lot to me, gives me incentive to keep going. So that's always nice. And I appreciate you guys taking your time. I know there's a lot of things you can watch, and you chose to watch my video, so I appreciate that. So thank you again. But for now, that will do it. My name is Joe. This has been Hexed Encountered. And until next time, happy gaming.